Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where I interview great leaders and try to extract their wisdom and experience for you to learn from and hopefully avoid making their mistakes. Check out practical-leadership.Academy because you want to help your new managers succeed with hybrid or remote working. Garin Hess, thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Can I ask you, would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So, the founder and CEO of a company called Consensus. I'm also father of 3 grown children and married to a wonderful woman named Kristen. And we've been doing Consensus, which is demo automation software to help scale pre-sales at enterprise software companies for about 10 years now. And that's been the major focus of my career the last 10 years. But really looking forward to this conversation.
We touched on living in a way that you have no regrets. And when I look back at my early career, I try not to have any regrets because, if you have a regret, you should have fixed it in the first place, right? And if you can't fix it, well, then you can't have a regret. What you can do is you can ask for forgiveness. I look back at the various people that I have used and abused as guinea pigs, willingly, unwillingly, unwittingly through my leadership career and made a disaster as you learn. Any number of mistakes. If we can help people avoid that, what's one of the highlights that you went through as you became a people leader, as you became an exec, as you grew up in the world of work? What's good to take away from the journey?
Yeah, when I think about regrets from my younger years, it's really a journey of self-awareness for me. I used to be very self-conscious and afraid of leadership, and yet I was constantly being put in leadership positions, both at work, at my church, and other things. And because I was hyper aware of my deficiencies, I would often focus on how do I improve my deficiencies, and I spent a lot of time obsessing, sort of self-obsessing about that. And I don't know when exactly or where I picked up this thinking, even though since then I've read it in a few places. But I eventually learned that, for me at least, what made the most sense was to stop thinking about and trying to improve on the deficiencies and just focus on my strengths, because I really believe that I've been blessed with some strengths that really lend themselves well to leadership, but I was so much focused on trying to fix the deficiencies that I wasn't able to press or double down on those. And once I realized, if I'm deficient in a certain area, if I'm weak in a certain area, I can only make small gains. I mean, over time, maybe you can make big gains, but to be the most effective, I really believe that it's best to just understand your strengths and focus on those, and to a large degree, ignore the deficiencies, because you can't be great at everything. There's this book I read years ago called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, which was really quite a good book. And I believe all the things that it says, but I don't think there's anybody who has all 21 characteristics. And I was systematically trying to go down and change the things that I was weak in. And so that's one thing that I suppose, if I look back on, that I kind of regret, is I wish I would have understood that earlier and just been okay with myself and focused on what I was good at, because that's where I can add the most value. And when I press on that has the most impact.
I think if you have some deficiencies and they're not toxic deficiencies, absolutely.
Well, I would challenge that just a little bit. So, Steve Jobs had many toxic deficiencies. I'm not sitting here arguing that we should obtain toxic deficiencies. Bill Gates had, maybe still has, toxic deficiencies. Elon Musk. All of the great leaders in the business world have had toxic deficiencies, and does that mean they're bad leaders? You could argue on the one sense that yes, because they're pain to work with, they hurt people's feelings. But you could also ask the question: is that the most important thing? And that's been a learning experience for me. And again, I'm not saying that for everybody that we want to just accept the toxic parts of our natures, but I also think that it's a double-edged sword. Can you have a Steve Jobs that did what he did without the way he bullied people around? I'm not sure, but I am grateful that he focused on his strengths and didn't sit there and worry too much about his toxic deficiencies, because I'm not sure he would have ever accomplished what he did.
There's I think a sentiment that and I'm sure you're picking this up as well, both in the UK and the US. And I'm happily married to an American, so I have an angle on your part of the world as well. In that there is this desire for, and you can call it empathization or call it something, but it's basically if you're not nice to the nth degree and utterly under this, I don't know, you have to project this veneer of, unless of course it's your nature, of humility, humanity, generosity, and all that sort of stuff. And as you said, most of these leaders are not particularly human or generous or nice. I work with a lot of entrepreneurial CEOs, and my goodness, there are some personalities there.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned this idea of being nice. And there's a really great line in one of my favorite Broadway plays called Into the Woods. And the line is from Little Red Riding Hood. She goes into the forest and, of course, meets the wolf. And the wolf is very charming, but the wolf ultimately takes her down a garden path and then eats her. And she, gets saved, just like the story goes, with her grandma. And she sings this song afterwards, and she says, among other things, that she's learned a lot of things. And one of the things she's learned is that nice is different than good. And it kind of goes to speaking of self-awareness, something about personally myself is I naturally come with an empathetic bent towards life. And it took me a long time as a leader to understand that could become a blocking or inhibiting factor in my leadership rather than a benefit. Most of the time, empathy is considered a benefit. At least it's touted, I should say, as something that leaders need to have. And I do think if you talk to Steve Jobs, you say, hey, you might have a little more empathy would be great. But the reality is that empathy, and you might even call it toxic empathy, because it can get in the way of true leadership. There's this really great book I read a few years ago called Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman.
Yes.
And
challenge
it's really,
over empathy. Challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really about how the modern Western culture overemphasizes what you're talking about. This herding mentality of we've got to make sure everybody feels good, and that's the primary objective. As long as everyone feels good, we're doing a good job. And I really don't believe that. Of course, if everyone feels good, that's great. That's a nice thing. But what is your main job as a leader? It's to accomplish the mission of your leadership role. And if people feel, whatever it is, and if people feel good in the process, fantastic. If they don't, that's not that big of a deal. Now, granted, there's a line to be crossed somewhere, morally, ethically, right? There's a line there somewhere. But I think that line is so far away from modern leadership thinking that we need to not think about that so much anymore. And what we really need to think about is how we lead. And leading really means that quite often you do things that make people very, very uncomfortable to the point where they don't like you. And this likability factor that seems to be so important in so many leadership lists on blogs and books and things is not really the main thing, in my opinion. And so I really like that line. Nice is different than good.
That's one of the ones for the post-it note under the screen. I think, nice equals not good. I like that. It's very clear. And I think it gets in the way. It really gets in the way. And it is almost quite uncomfortable to talk about, frankly, because I don't want to be really put my neck out there too far and saying, well, actually, maybe you need to be a bit of a jerk. You don't need to be a toxic, nasty intentionally, as you said, intentionally. It's not a character trait we want to amplify.
Yeah, you have to be willing to be looked at as a jerk, even though you're not trying to be. You don't want to act like one, but some people will think you are just because you're asking them to do hard things they don't want to do
in order to get something done.
Yeah, and that's not being a jerk. That's being a leader.
And there's the side of this, and this is the big takeaway I try to get into people's heads, is that if you hold people accountable for their actions, if you hold people accountable to what they say or what you've said they're going to do, you drive them towards achievement, towards delivery, towards contentment. And there's immense satisfaction and joy that comes from getting stuff done.
Well, so
I've done that to you, even though you hate me. You're welcome.
Absolutely.
Welcome.
It's like I I told there was a young guy that I used to work with, and he was playing a lot of ping pong or table tennis in our office, and he was missing his deadlines. And normally I wasn't, I didn't really care when people did their work or how they did it, but he was directly reporting to me, and he kept missing his deadlines. And I said, I see you playing a lot of table tennis and you're not hitting your deadlines. Tell me about that. And he's like, well, culture here is terrible. We don't have enough fun. It's this and that. And I said, look, you can't play enough table tennis to take away the bad feeling that comes from not getting your work done. Right. And I realized at that point that fun in my mind was not the same as fun as his mind. My fun is achieving the objectives. And your comment about contentment, I think, is really valid, because this is what I want most for my people that I work with, is I want them to feel a type of joy from work that only comes. I recently described it at our only leadership meeting, that it's a type of joy that comes from the quest, and a quest is not without extreme challenges and striving. That's a great word for it. Striving, pressing forward. If you don't have something to press against, press forward, reach for, stretch, then you're kind of coasting. You're not really growing. And I don't think without growth you can actually really truly enjoy work. So yeah.
I think it's what is the line? Joy cometh in the morning. Yes.
Yes.
And it's that joy and happiness are or aren't the same thing. What is joy without happiness? Right. There's this. I think joy is a lot more about the choices you make than the journey you find yourself on, perhaps. Now we're getting too. It's almost getting too philosophical for this.
That would be a great for another podcast, because
that's a great one.
The difference between happiness and joy is a good one. But it's true that sometimes at work we feel so challenged that we are under great duress. I recently asked my VP of Finance to help us get through closing a $110 million investment round in our company. That took about 4 to 5 months of intense work. And she was pretty burnt out near the end. But now she is extremely proud of the fact that she got this done, and she did a tremendous job. And that's what I think of when you say joy in the morning, because that night can feel kind of long, but joy comes in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Every morning. Yeah. Refreshed every morning. That's it. I like that. So we're working on making sure that the folk around us don't feel regret when they get to a point and they look back in the disaster of the trail of victims that they've left behind them in their management educational career, like mine. I'm sorry if you're there. Again, I apologize. You know where I live. Just, oh boy. Is there a particular event? Is there a mistake or something that perhaps taught you more than others on this journey?
Well, I'd say kind of going back to this topic, because this is a big one for me personally, just because of the over amplified sense of empathy. Back in 2008, it was a different technology startup, and we were struggling. And there was one of our developers that I knew personally, had hired him as kind of a personal friend. He's really a good guy, really good guy, one of the best guys you'll ever meet, but he just wasn't performing. And I waited and waited and waited too long to let him go. And what I realized through that was that I was really putting at risk everyone else's jobs for a variety of reasons. One, because we were a very small company. I think at the time we only had 10 people. And the more money more of our capital I was spending on him, the shorter our runway was getting for everyone else. But also, when somebody's not pulling their weight, especially on a small team, it demoralizes everybody else, and it causes flight risks and things like that. And so I would say that for me, I realized after I let him go that I should have done it about 6 months before. And it goes back to this question of, I was really focused on his needs and what I felt like was his right to prove to me that he could do the job. And I wasn't realizing that my focus on his needs and his family's needs was really putting at risk everyone else's. And that was an eye-opening experience for me that's helped me ever since to make hard but better decisions.
I think the further up the greasy pole we all ascend, and we discover that in reality our job is a steward of capital. It's the intelligence,
it's the lifeblood of the organization.
It is, and that those decisions, it's all the people decisions. They're the ones that I don't think I've ever regretted. We talked about regretted firing anyone. but I've regretted not doing it fast enough.
It's funny. I've never heard any manager say I regret doing it so quickly.
No, that's the thing.
Yeah, we're all a little slow to do it, and it's because it's distasteful, it's unpleasant, and it's difficult for everybody involved.
So there's you're talking about this. We're talking about strengths and maximizing the strengths that we have, as opposed to leaning into those weaknesses. And typically, this is the thing when my background's in training and all sorts of stuff. My mum was a teacher. And of course, you train people who are not good at something to get better at it, right? That's just what you do. No, you bloody don't. No, you do not. Well, yeah, you might need to learn a new skill. Fair enough. But you train people who are good at something to get amazing at it. You can take somebody who's a 2 and get them to be a 3. But you can take somebody who's a 6 and you can get them to be a 9. And that moves the needle. And I think when you have and I wasn't sure where I was going with this. I had a really, really good point in my mind and I've lost it.
Well, what it makes me think of is this really great documentary on Michael Jordan, the American NBA star. And, if you were going to work with him as a coach, would you try to help him? He had some pretty rough edges, according to his teammates, in terms of how he interacted with them. Would you work on helping his basketball skills continue to get better, or how he got along with his teammates? Right? You're going to focus on the basketball skills the most. And I think if we look at each of ourselves and just be compassionate and patient on the areas where we're a little bit weak, but focus on those strengths, then each of us are going to find the place where we can add the most value.
Yeah. When you look back from where you are, and you're now slightly older, slightly wiser, and much more exalted position than you were in 2008, and there's a quote that you have at the front of your book, which I can highly recommend to everyone. It's selling is hard, buying is harder. And it was quite a game-changing set of thoughts that I got from it when I first read it. It's the concept of buying journeys, not selling journeys. And instinctively, as a fairly decent salesperson, I knew I was taking somebody on a journey. But the fact that you almost empirically put together a process to say, no, it's them. The buyer does everything. You have to lead them. You have to guide them. You can encourage them. They close the deal. They're the ones. Right at the beginning of this really good book, you have walk the same road, arrive at the same destination. You're the same you. Walk a different road, arrive at a different destination, and you're a different you. Can you unpack that for me?
Well, I realized I wrote that after the book was completed. And I realized what I'm really asking people to do is fundamentally change what they've been used to doing. And anytime you're faced with a fundamental change, you're really asking yourself the question of whether you want to go on a personal growth journey or not, or if you want to just stay at the comfortable status quo. And that's really the question when it comes to change management, whether it's your individual self going on some change journey or whether you're leading change inside the organization. It's all about just what kind of vision do you have about it? And in this case, what I was trying to do with that is help the readers see that this isn't just about getting a deal done. It's not just about hitting your targets. It's if you go on this journey of truly trying to incorporate buyer enablement as an approach to B2B sales, you will not only achieve your goals, but you will find yourself changed in the process. And I thought that might be appealing to people and maybe motivating. So that's where that came from.
I think if you get your sellers to understand that they are not selling, they are in fact enabling buyers.
Yeah.
And that they're enabling buyers to see, in the second part, to see the success that they get once you've left the building. Because you're not selling the thing. You're not even selling the use of the thing or the output of the thing. You're selling what happens after they've used it, got the output, and long forgotten that they ever did it. That's what you're selling. And if you can enable that journey, it's such a more fulfilling role.
Yeah, and a lot of the people that we've sold our software to, for example, or I should say we've coached our customers into buying.
Well done. I like that. Good.
Has fundamentally changed their careers, not only because they were able to get the benefits of implementing buyer enablement and demo automation inside their own organizations, but because bringing these concepts of buyer enablement into the organization gave them an opportunity to bring strategic thinking into the process, and it created upward mobility for them in the organization. So some of our customers who in the past had titles like global head of pre-sales or sales engineering are now global head of buyer enablement, and they are elevated, and it's helped bring pre-sales in a lot of these enterprise software organizations sort of out of the dark corners of the org and into more of a strategic part of the process for the organization, the growth process. So it's fun to think about. We aren't at our work at Consensus, we're not just selling people software to accomplish some value, which is awesome in and of itself, but we're helping those people that do that to have opportunities to rise up in their own organizations.
So by consensus, get promoted.
That's not a bad tagline, because that's happened a lot.
Feel free, use it as you will. I like it. Is there something you might want to thank the young Garin for doing?
It's such a great question. And I think of it as a natural bent in life. Like I said, maybe I'm a little more focused on what I wish I would have done differently. But when I look back on this and think of that question, I think about sitting in a class in college. It was actually an English literature major, but my senior year, I took a entrepreneurship lecture series for a half a credit at the business school because I thought it sounded interesting. I didn't know anything about business, and it inspired me. It really changed the course of my career, I think. And there was one man, I don't even remember what company or thing he did, or what business he built, but he said this quote. He said, "Too many men tiptoe through life trying to make it safely to death." And I remember hearing that and just thinking, I do not want to do that. And I would say if there's one thing I want to thank my younger self for, it is being willing to take risks, no matter how difficult it ended up being. Sometimes, like Elon Musk said, it's like eating glass, and to run your own company. And it's true. But I am grateful, regardless of how it turned out, that I was willing to take those risks. And I hope I still am as I move through the rest of my life.
We touched on the idea of regrets and the concept of perhaps a regret minimization framework.
All of that.
Back in time, intellectually, from your 97-year-old self to even where we are now, and saying, okay, how do we minimize the potential for regret? What do we do from here on in to make sure we are our what's the glib? We're living our best lives. We're being our best selves. All that good. How does that sit with you?
I love the idea. I don't know that it would ever be possible to live a life with no regrets, because regrets come from wisdom gained. And you don't gain wisdom. Wisdom looking back is sort of what causes the regret.
Well, I've got an equation for wisdom, which is knowledge plus experience plus reflection equals wisdom.
I like it. Yeah. But I do like this idea. I mean, I think if we spent more time thinking about it, you had mentioned this nurse, the end of life nurse that was talking and did a study on regret. And I think that is one of the ways to potentially reduce regret, and that is to imagine our death. I don't think we do enough of that in this life. We sort of go along thinking life is, we know it won't go on forever, but
You'd be surprised.
We just think that sort of that it will go on as it is. And I'd say one thing that my wife said once. She said, I try to thank God for what did she say? Now I'm going to mess it up. Something like, I try to thank God for what I would ask him for if it was lost. So I think of a friend of mine who had a stroke and lost his ability to walk. Well, ever since I saw him go through that and continue to see him in a wheelchair, I'm more conscious of thanking and being grateful for the ability to walk. It's a more conscious awareness. If we think about what it's like to lose things, maybe we'll be more grateful. Maybe we'll pay more attention, make sure we safeguard them, and maybe prevent some regret.
Mm-hmm. There's you say that everybody's conscious of the fact that we are what is it, memento mori. You are not immortal. Remember, you shall die. There was a woman who I know in passing who appeared on TV during the whole COVID debacle and said, well, after all, we're all going to die. She was a nurse. She said, after all, we're all going to die. And the complaints came in. She was pilloried for saying, how can you say
Really?
that?
Just for saying that?
You are, what?
No one likes to hear the truth.
Oh my goodness, really? And there's an aspect, I think, of self-obsession there.
Yeah, for sure.
It's the narcissism, the closedness of some
Right.
that really it hurts. I mean, regardless of what your faith is, please have some, at least in humanity. You don't have
Yeah.
to believe in the resurrection and the life, but you have to have something there. My goodness.
Right.
James. So let us live a life in a way that we have no regrets, to quote the prayer from your friend Gordon. That's a nice one. I think that's a reasonable way to move and say, Garin, how can people find you should they wish to?
I'd love to engage with any of your audience in further conversation. Best place to find me is on LinkedIn, and I have a pretty unique name, so you'll probably be able to find me pretty easily.
Let us live in a way that we have no regrets. Garin Hess, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Paul.
That's a wrap. Thank you for joining me today. Your homework is to leave your 5-star review, and please, any comments you have, you really help me to improve every day, and it also helps people to discover me online. You should check out practical-leadership.academy because you want to help your new managers succeed with hybrid or remote working.